10th anniversary of our departure from the UK coincided with the start of the 2013 Sail Indonesia Rally. It was a bright sunny morning with light winds. Over 80 boats started from Darwin on the day, the Sail Malaysia route contingent leaving early to catch the tides through the Dundas Strait. Some others were left behind with gear failure, medical issues, etc. As always, it was sad to leave friends behind. Darwin had been our home for 18 months and we had made some great friends there. The 400-mile trip to Kupang was a mixture of light winds during the day, which could be sailed, and motoring at night in calm conditions, all within sight of other rally members. It was dusk 3 days later when we rounded the first island in Indonesia, with only the 17-mile-long Sail Strait to navigate. We were looking forward to a well-earned rest and party time in Kupang. There were 2 sailboats ahead of us dropping sail to motor the last few miles to the anchorage. We decided to just furl our genoa and hold the main in tight and motor. The darkness was quickly descending. There's very little twilight in the tropics. And, as if by magic, a myriad of lights appeared on the narrow passage through to our anchorage. It seemed that the whole fleet of Indonesian squid boats were out to greet us that night. These are mainly made of timber and come in a variety of sizes, from a single dugout canoe with a lantern to large multi-hulled monstrosities with poles sticking out both sides, festooned with either huge incandescent bulbs or fluorescent tubes, all to attract the squid to the surface for catching with hand lines by crews of anything up to 40 men. These boats often had no navigation lights, and the crew themselves were blinded by their own lights. The only sensible strategy other vessels can adopt is keep clear. The new course brought with it a change in conditions, from a 15-knot beam reach to a 25 to 30-knot headwind. The wind was being funneled down the channel between the islands. The smooth seas turned into a short, sharp chop, and our engine laboured under the onslaught. We crashed on. Others we heard on the radio were heaving to outside the strait. Wise move. Around 10 p.m, after a couple of hours of crashing seas and worn out by numerous close encounters with squid boats, we were thankfully only about a mile or so away from our destination. I called to Keith to listen. Bleep, bleep. There it goes again. An alien sound. Keith was on the helm and sent me down to check the engine. It all looks okay, I said. Oh well, we'll sort it out in the morning. Suddenly an alarm bell rang in Keith's head. The oil pressure gauge dropped. The engine laboured and hiccuped. Just as he turned the key to stop the engine, realisation hit him in the stomach. No oil. With the engine out of commission, we quickly unfurled the genoa. Thankfully, by now we could actually see the end of the strait and the open water beyond. Poco Andante had now entered the bay outside Kupang, so at least we had sea room. You could see the bright city lights and hear the sound of a disco, but we were now heading out to sea. Thankfully, the wind conditions in the open bay were lighter and we weren't fighting the strong headwinds anymore. We could see the anchorage, but in the confusion of lights ashore, it made the boats at anchor invisible to the eye. But fortunately, some of the yachts had left their AIS on, and we used these as homing beacons. The AIS is the automatic identification system which uses transceivers to send and receive information about other vessels. After a few tacks to get into shallow enough water, dodging squid boats, we finally dropped anchor at around midnight. What a relief. Collapsing into bed, dreading what we would find in the morning, we slept fitfully. Next day, all hell broke loose in the anchorage as strong winds caused quite a few boats to drag their anchors. One of them brushed against one of the other boats immediately in front of us. Keith jumped in our dinghy and went to help, but I realised that Poco Andante was dragging as well. I whistled Keith back and he put out all our chain and a second anchor. We finally held. The next day we slowly started dragging again, but without an engine we couldn't move ourselves even with our 15 horsepower outboard. The winds and current were too strong. Some kind cruisers gathered and manually raised both our anchors. Without an engine we couldn't run the windlass, and with the help of several ribs shunted us closer to shore. The call for help to the rest of the fleet brought welcome arms and minds to the problem. Yes, sounds like the engine's seized. This will need a new engine or a complete rebuild. With all the attendant issues this presented, it sounded disastrous. Here we were in Kupang, Indonesia, nearly as third world as it gets. Not even a jetty to tie up to. Would this be the end of our adventure? Keith and I started to talk about an exit strategy. Should we abandon Poco Andante here and walk away? Did we have the resolve necessary to undertake the repairs here? Self-recriminations came. I should have checked the dipstick. We should have waited until morning. Keith should have turned the engine off sooner. We could have, we should have. Over the last 10 years, we had battled through many difficulties and setbacks, but we were still in love with our lifestyle. In the end, we decided that we weren't ready to end our amazing adventure. We contacted the Sail Indonesia Rally representative, who recommended Matt, a local mechanic with pretty good English. His verdict? A seized engine. The only way to tell the extent of the damage was to dismantle the entire engine. Keith went ashore with Matt to source a block and tackle and some timbers and beams to raise the engine. I stayed aboard. The wind was still quite strong, and sure enough, Poco started dragging again slowly. This time I was on my own. The dinghy was on the beach and Keith was out of VHF range. I put out a call for help on the VHF radio, and once again, the great cruising community came over and helped. As you can imagine, all these male cruisers had their own ideas on how to solve the problem. A mere female couldn't possibly know what to do. 2 of them raised our anchor and put it in the dinghy, together with all our chain, 65 metres, and most of our rode. That's the rope bit beyond the chain. And before I could suggest moving Poco Andante forward and using the dinghies to go astern to set the anchor, they had motored forward, laid out all 65 metres in only 6 metres of water. Later, Keith and I managed to bring in most of the road and laid a second anchor, but we still felt vulnerable when the wind turned and put Poco onto a lee shore. At least it was holding, just very worrying. 3 to 4 very dirty days later, Keith and Matt had disconnected everything from the engine and moved it onto our galley floor. Inspection determined that one of the rear engine mounts had failed, and when the engine dropped, it knocked out the oil filter. Poco had suffered instant total loss of oil. Once the head of the engine was removed, it appeared that only the big end bearing had seized, and although we had a good supply of parts, we didn't carry a spare set of bearings. Having diagnosed our problem, Matt went off to help other yachts with their problems, and we started sourcing spares for our Ford Transit engine. Lancing Marine, the company in the UK who supplied the original engine, were able to supply the parts. An Australian company also quoted, but twice the price. We gave Lancing Marine the go-ahead. As if engine failure wasn't enough, when Lancing Marine tried to put through the payment using Keith's UK credit card, the transaction set up alarm with his UK bank's fraud squad. Unfortunately, by the time we were alerted, it was Saturday morning in Indonesia, and we had to wait until Monday to call the bank. A very frustrating, wasted weekend. In the meantime, we sent them my credit card details, and the transaction finally went through on Monday and the parts dispatched on Tuesday, 13 days after the incident. We had been advised by Sail Indonesia to use DHL in this part of the world, although we have since found out that UPS and the local J&E couriers work just as well. Indonesia levies a 30% duty on everything, and the only place to get goods cleared in is Jakarta or Bali. In the end, we decided to have them sent to Dili in East Timor. Although a different country, it was at least on the same landmass as Kupang. We arranged for the parts to be sent to Isabel, the Toll Marine Logistics office manager in East Timor. Isabel was Keith's associate when he was working in Darwin. Our visas for Indonesia were single entry only, therefore we couldn't collect them ourselves. Matt the mechanic said he had business to do in Dili, the capital of East Timor, and would take the bus up there and collect the parts from Isabel. As a local, he was also unlikely to be checked by Indonesian customs. The parts arrived in Singapore on Thursday. We got all excited, but in vain. When Isabel went to the DHL office, they said the parcel wouldn't arrive in Dili until the following Monday. So yet another long, frustrating weekend. Then on Monday, DHL told Isabel she needed a tax file number for some unknown reason, and that it takes 3 days to get one. Matt had been on standby to travel up to Dili, which is apparently about a 12-hour trip due to traffic and road conditions, but we had to call that off pending clearance. Then on the Tuesday, Isabel went to DHL again and was advised it was a public holiday. Finally on Thursday, the goods were cleared, but Matt couldn't book a ticket as everything for the Friday was full. On Saturday, Matt reached Dili, too late for his rendezvous with Isabel, but they finally met on Sunday morning. Parts collected. After a day for Matt to check out a possible business enterprise, he took the bus back to Kupang and thankfully didn't have to pay the 30% duty. On Tuesday morning, we had a panic call from Matt to meet on the beach. When we turned up, it transpired that we had ordered the wrong bearing sets. There was a mix-up due to language problems between big end and main bearings. This difficulty could have been overcome with diagrams, but Matt's English was so good we had assumed that his definition of big end or main bearings were correct. After this frustration and disappointment, We got right onto it again and ordered the correct parts that evening from Lansing Marine. It was now 27 days since the catastrophe. This time we decided to try the Bali route and use Sail Indonesia's agent Erna to intercept the parcel and forward it to Kupang. Again, the team at Lansing Marine worked speedily and dispatched the correct parts on Thursday. Once again, we spent another frustrating weekend checking the tracking number and cheering at every little change in progress. The goods finally arrived in Bali, cleared through customs 3 days later, and were then dispatched to Kupang. The correct parts arrived, to our great joy and jubilation, 38 days after the incident. Matt organised regrinding of the crankshaft with the help of $20 incentive. He managed to get it done by that evening. Engine assembly started in earnest on Sunday. First, the bottom end was put together. The next day, the engine was put into place and the engine mount problem solved. Bill, from the US yacht Solstice, had kindly given us some engine mounts surplus to his requirements. Matt stripped these down, modified the profile, and added some parts from a car suspension. We now had custom low-profile mounts. This was all completed on the Tuesday. With the engine aligned and the starter motor installed, we could turn the engine over to check the oil flow, etc. All okay. The head and other bits and pieces were fitted and the engine fired up again, briefly, without the cooling system connected. All good, and we had our galley back. We'd been having to climb over the engine to reach our sleeping berth. By Thursday, we had a fully installed engine and we fired it up. First attempt, it burst into life. More cheers. It was now 43 days since the incident. We could finally raise the anchors and give the engine a bit of a sea trial. The engine ran okay, but Poco wasn't moving forward very well. We struggled to cover 200 metres to a better spot and re-anchored. Keith dived in and realised the waterline was covered with growth and the propeller was encrusted with barnacles. The whole boat was filthy with oil and dust. Yuck. Matt arranged for a team of 5 lads to come on board and help clean the boat and scrub the hull. They attempted to clean the prop, but in the end Keith had to put his scuba gear on and finish the job. On Friday 13th of September, Poco Andante was ready for a full sea trial and we set off for a trip to a local island and back, around 5 miles away. Despite the inauspicious date and a lot of trepidation, all went well and we returned safely. Matt came back on board on Monday to do final checks, reset the tappets and deemed us all clear to leave. We parted with $1 million Indonesian rupiah, about $200 to settle the balance of his bill, about $1,000 in total. We were then faced with a dilemma. Our 60-day visa only had 14 days remaining. Should we leave immediately and try to get to Bali where we could get a visa extension, or renew in Kupang? Charles, a local agent, assured us that we could get our visa 30-day extension through by Friday. With this assurance, we decided to renew them in Kupang. This would relieve us of the worry further down the track and save us a mad dash to Bali. Thursday came. Computer problems at the immigration department had slowed the process down. Friday came, still computer problems. All will be okay on Monday. Another frustrating weekend. On Sunday, the Oyster Round the World Rally turned up. Would this slow down our visa renewals? Monday we went to the immigration office with Charles to see the problem firsthand. The guys there were very apologetic, but the computers were still not working. After a long discussion, Keith and I announced that we would wait in the office until they were fixed. This seemed to help, as the manager got on the phone to Jakarta and then the local telecoms company. The office was due to close at 4 p.m. The computer man arrived at 3:30. He reset the network and the girls stayed on just to process our visas, including digital fingerprinting and photos. We got back to the boat at 5 p.m. and by 7 p.m. on Monday the 23rd of September we were gone, 54 days after arriving in Kupang. So what did we do during the long wait? We did manage to attend the opening ceremony for the Sail Komodo with hosts of dignitaries and good food, dancing and cultural displays. also spent long afternoons in the bar and felt rather alone after the rest of the rally fleet departed. We cleaned the engine bay and all the parts. As Matt had been dismantling the engine, he'd put the parts in different buckets. Eventually I had to tell him we weren't a bucket shop, I'd run out, but managed to find yet another container for him. We sorted and cleaned all the bolts and put them in Ziploc bags with the nut size and length marked. We hoped this would speed up the rebuild. We cleaned all the oil out of the sump and the rest of the boat. Barbara and Roger and Lazybones, our neighbours at the marina in Darwin, now on the Sail Indonesia Rally as well, kindly gave us a litre of something called CT18 truck wash, which they swear by, and I could see why. It was miraculous. Poco Andante had greasy hand and footprints everywhere, but this stuff just cleaned it all away. So the start to resuming our cruising life didn't quite go as planned, but as they say, shit happens. At least we were stuck somewhere with access to a reasonable city, Wi-Fi on board, a mechanic, and the means to get the engine repaired. Keith also ordered new piston rings, and once the engine was rebuilt, it was as good as new. We were also lucky to have the funds to be able to do the job properly rather than a quick fix. And the labour rates were much cheaper than in Australia. Matt quoted $700 for his labour, plus the cost for him to go to Dili to get the parts, about another $150, and machining the crankshaft, $160. Pretty reasonable in the end. We both found the delays very frustrating and the boredom was incredible. We read, played rummy and Scrabble. I won the tournament 45 games to 34. We did boat chores and went to the restaurant for lunch every couple of days. However, the tides were occasionally unfavourable for that. And we listened to the imam call to prayer 5 times a day from the mosque about 200 metres from where Poco Andante was anchored. Not musical at all. The definition of cruising? Boat maintenance in exotic locations. During the time, Keith and I had frequent boat conferences to discuss our future plans. Were we ready to give up the cruising life, or could we put this episode behind us? In the immediate future, we didn't have much choice, either go forwards or sail back to Australia. We felt that if we were to abandon our dream, Australia was not a good place to try to sell the boat. Onwards we would go, and reassess our thoughts when we had the chance to recover our equilibrium. Once away, we had to rush through 2,000 nautical miles in a month. This was all the time that remained on our 90-day sailing permit for Poco Andante. We'd have to be very selective where we stopped and make several 2- and 3-day passages to cover the miles. 36 hours later, we did manage a flying one afternoon stop on Sumba so I could check out the renowned ikat cloth that they weave there. I've always loved fabrics, and ikat is an amazing cloth in which the images are created on the loom by dyeing the warp, the lengthwise threads, at the specific places where they will appear in the finished cloth once the weft, the crosswise threads, are woven in. The images and/or patterns can be complex, multicoloured, requiring very specific dyeing and weaving skills. I couldn't resist buying a couple of wall hangings. Then it was overnight to Rinka. We'd been told that you could see Komodo dragons here, and if so, we would save time by not having to stop at Komodo. Waiting on the beach were a group of truly scary, scaly monsters. These huge, leathery creatures were up to 3 meters long, with drooling mouths and long blue, forked tongues flicking incessantly, trying to pick up the scent of their next victim. They can move surprisingly quickly. We were on our own, but felt brave enough to go ashore. As we stood on the edge of the beach, a group of 5 started lumbering out from under the trees and heading towards us. We retreated to the dinghy and fended them off with an oar and a long stick, discretion being the better part of valour. We departed to explore the rest of the area by dinghy. In one bay we spotted a makeshift camp. After collecting some tradable fare from Poco Andante, sweets and biscuits, we paid a visit. It turned out they were a group of park rangers who were there to carry out a dragon survey. Their camp was surrounded by these beasts. It was interesting to see that the guys were also very wary of them, and they all had sticks to hand. The biscuits and sweets were much appreciated. When they raised the issue of the park fees for our night's stay, we persuaded them that they had just eaten the fees. A 4-day passage took us to Lavina on the north coast of Bali. We stayed here for 5 days. Keith found a dentist to carry out a temporary repair on a broken tooth. The dentist said it really needed a crown, but our visas didn't have enough time for that. It would be a further 900 nautical miles before we reached Nongsa Point, our checkout port for Indonesia. We needed to cover some miles. In Bali, we did take a little time out. We topped up the diesel and hired a car and driver for one day to do a quick sightseeing trip to Ubud. And the UNESCO World Heritage Paddy Terraces at Jatiluwe. Bali is a special place and we have since been back several times. After leaving Bali, a 3-day passage took us to Pulau Bawean, where we started to link up with stragglers from the Sail Indonesia Rally. An overnight stop before continuing to the Karamanjawa Islands. At Karamanjawa, we met up with Tom and Colleen from Makisha, and we had a fun day with them searching for fuel. This was ladled out into our jerry cans from a barrel. Quality was very suspect, but with no choice you took what you could get. One of the islands in the Karamanjawa group is Pulau Parang, where we stopped one night as the island has some great snorkelling. From there it was a long 250-mile motor to Pulau Belitung, where we finally caught up with the rest of the rally yachts. Belitung, one of the gems of Indonesia, doesn't even get a mention in Lonely Planet Guide. It has a lovely anchorage with wide, white, sandy beaches dotted with granite outcrops. Great snorkelling and accommodating beach bars. There was a cultural evening at the local stadium. And barbecues on the outlying islands. A great welcome back to Sail Indonesia. As Poco moved north, the weather became more affected by the ITCZ, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, with rain, squalls and thunderstorms as we reached the equatorial region. Our next anchorage was at North Bangka, a lovely but shallow anchorage. Not much there, but a lovely walk on the beach. Keith and I spent a couple of days here with a group of others. It was a yacht motor sail to Kentar, crossing the equator soon after daybreak on the 20th of October. We celebrated by toasting Neptune's health. Poco Andante was now in the Northern Hemisphere again after 7 years. Kentar is a remote little island, and we had our first visit by locals requesting alms. We handed over the 25-kilogram bag of sugar given to us in Darwin for such an occasion, plus gifts of clothing, school exercise books and sweets, and we still had loads on board for future trades. We were now getting closer to Singapore, and the shipping traffic was on the increase. The final event of the Sail Indonesia Rally was at a resort on the north coast of Bintan. We got there in 2 short day hops. The resort opened their doors to Sail Indonesia. Organising a tour of the island, displaying its cultures. And a gala dinner second to none, a fitting end to an eventful rally for us. Many of the Sail Indonesia Rally participants also joined up for the Sail Malaysia Rally, which was due to leave Danga Bay in Johor Bahru about 3 weeks after the end of the Sail Indonesia Rally. This rally cruises up the west coast of Malaysia to the northern duty-free island of Langkawi, just south of the border with Thailand. From Bintan, Indonesia to Danga Bay, Malaysia was only 70 miles, but included crossing the Singapore Straits. It can be compared to trying to cross a busy 5-mile wide freeway on foot, with ships passing every few minutes. We planned to spend our time in Johor Bahru rather than Singapore. JB was much cheaper and only a few kilometres by bus from Singapore. Tides were favourable when we left Bintan, and we expected to be in JB by nightfall. After travelling west along the Indonesian shore, we turned north to cross the Singapore Straits. Simple enough, just dodge the odd ship, and in half an hour you're across. However, Indonesia had one last gift planned for us. As we were a third of the way across, the engine faltered and slowed dramatically. I immediately took it out of gear and revved the engine. The engine seemed okay. Conclusion, we must have picked something up around the prop. With little wind, we were stationary and a hazard to shipping. As a last hope, I put the engine into gear again, and thankfully Poco Andante started to move, albeit with a huge imbalance and vibration. At low revs, it felt manageable, so we crawled across and threaded Poco through the myriad of anchored ships and coastal shipping until we reached the bridge crossing from Singapore to Malaysia. Here, with relief and in failing light, we anchored for the night. Next morning, a quick swim revealed that Poco had a plastic sack around the prop, which Keith was able to cut away. That evening found us snug in Danga Bay Marina, where we finally relaxed after 3 gruelling months in Indonesia. Johor Bahru, also known as JB, is the second largest city in Malaysia after KL, Kuala Lumpur, and it was in a huge developmental phase. A large number of people commute daily to Singapore, just 1 kilometre away across the causeway. Similarly, Singaporeans visit JB to shop, party and holiday. English is commonly spoken, and its facilities are similar to any large metropolitan city. Major supermarkets such as Giant, Tesco's and Cold Storage have a full range of produce. After Indonesia, it was great to be able to buy what you wanted. Everything was at hand in Danga Bay, and boat bits could be easily repaired, although sourcing specialist chandlery items was still a problem. The marina itself was a bit rough around the edges and was scheduled to be closed and redeveloped. Nevertheless, we enjoyed our stay there, and it gave us a much-needed time to carry out some maintenance and chores aboard Poco. After the engine rebuild and the subsequent month of motoring, the engine definitely needed an oil change and new filters. Keith managed to get an appointment with a local dentist who had been trained in Scotland. She arranged for the temporary filling to be replaced with a crown. I also had my teeth checked and cleaned. One memorable day, November the 8th, saw us visiting Singapore Zoo. It was a 2 ringgit, about 75-cent bus trip to Singapore across the causeway. Thousands do it every day. Even so, we had to clear customs and immigration, which was carried out very efficiently. Singapore Zoo is laid out beautifully and we had a lovely day. While we were in the panda house, we decided that a soft panda toy would be a lovely gift for our forthcoming grandchild, which was due in a couple of weeks, and also to include a photo of ourselves. When we arrived back at JB, we found a message from Rob and Jazz that Rosie Sophia had been born that morning while we were visiting the zoo. How serendipitous was that? Sail Malaysia started a few days later with a tour of the Johor region. followed by a party and reception at Danka Bay, set the scene for the next month or so. Cruising the West Malaysian coast is not difficult. The water is shallow and the coastline is well protected. Conceivably, we could anchor anywhere. However, it hasn't got much to offer in the way of beaches and sights along the way. The main hazards are ships, trawlers and fishing nets, plus numerous tugs and tows. Shipping can be a problem, but they tend to keep to the shipping lanes. Our strategy was to sail just inside the shipping lanes to avoid nets and use the north-going ebb currents to best advantage. Sail Malaysia did a great job in making the trip up to Langkawi fun, organising events along the way at each of the marinas dotted along the coast. The first main stop was Port Dickson, a resort with a marina attached, swimming pool, bar, etc. The rally organised various excursions. We went to KL for the day and acted like tourists. We'd actually been there the previous year for Rob and Jazz's wedding. There was also a cultural visit. Reception hosted by the local tourist board. Pangkor Marina was the next main stop. This small marina is a working yard. James, the manager, works hard to help the yachties. Haul out is easy and it is a good place to leave the boat for a long period. We caught up with Peter and Tony from Tigger. We hadn't seen them since Brisbane over 4 years earlier, and it was great to catch up. James from Pangkor Marina arranged a great tour of Pulau Pangkor, the island just off from the marina. Highlight was a visit to a traditional wood boat building yard. The owner was a tribute to the skills of a bygone age. These large fishing craft were made from local hardwood and all hand-built without the aid of plans. It'll be sad to see these skills disappear when he finally retires. Keith and I were keen to get back to Penang, where Rob and Jazz were married just over a year ago. Anchoring in Penang is not easy. The town marina was destroyed by storms the previous year, and the only other marina, Straits Quay, was fully booked. Tigger had recommended the Jerry Jack anchorage close to the Jerry Jack Resort jetty. This was a great choice. The guys from the resort were very welcoming and were happy to keep an eye on your dinghy tied to their jetty. Although a little way out of town, the buses ran about every 15 minutes or so, making it easy to get around. We had a great time revisiting old haunts and took in a few new sights. A visit to the chemical man was on the agenda to pick up some phosphoric acid, acetone and other stuff. The shop was amazing. It was filled wall to wall, floor to ceiling with thousands of different chemicals all for sale. The proprietor was well past retirement age, and although there was no clear stock system, he knew exactly what he had and where it was. A unique guy. Sadly, he has since passed away. As Keith's telephone consultation with Princess Alexandra Hospital was looming, we visited a local GP to see if we could arrange blood tests. He advised us to visit a Dr. Leon Quinoa, a haematology oncologist at the Gleneagles Hospital. The medical facilities in Penang, Malaysia are excellent, state-of-the-art with many of the specialists trained in the UK and USA. Costs are reasonable, language is no problem, and there were no waiting lists. We turned up at Gleneagles. The hospital was impressive, and after registration at the reception desk, Keith was immediately given an appointment for that morning and blood tests performed. He was asked to return at 4 p.m. for the results. Following a review with Dr. Leong and a thorough physical examination, Keith was given a provisional no change and stable result, pending the results of the final blood test. Great. One specific test had to be carried out in Australia, and this was efficiently arranged. We were truly amazed by the efficiency and expertise of the staff there. 10 days later, we had all the results and faxed them to the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Brisbane. The process was so slick that we were to use these amenities over the next year or so. With the results in hand, Keith had a telephone conversation with the specialist in Brisbane, who confirmed a small elevation in the markers for Keith's disease, but not sufficient to give cause for concern. After a few days, we left on the final leg to Langkawi, anchoring in Kua, the main town, to stock up on beer, wine and fresh produce. Langkawi was a duty-free island and we were keen to take advantage of this before moving Poco Andante to Reback Marina for the rally finale. Reback Marina is a luxurious island resort with a well-protected marina, and we were able to shake off the dust from our travels and laze in exotic luxury. It had been a long 5 months and, on balance, a positive resumption of our cruising life.